perspective. And so when we were finished with the activity, we looked around and we noticed that many of the people that were advocating on issues that impacted black folks either weren't black, or if they were operating from a compromised position. And so, for us, it was important to form an organization that can advocate unapologetically for black people. So we've, advocated on issues around the criminal legal system, around community empowerment, investment in grassroots organizations, and a wide range of other, just general issues. So that's kind of a summation of what LBS is.
So what year was it started again?
2010.
So now you guys are 14 years in.
That's right.
Big salute to that.
Yes,
so advocating on behalf of African Americans cannot be an easy task.
That's right. Especially doing it from the perspective that we have. As we were coming up, there were a lot of folks that I think out of love said to us, y'all not going to be able to talk all that black stuff. You're eventually going to have to compromise. And one of the things that I can say I'm most proud of is that we've been able to maintain kind of our strong, unapologetic stance in advocating for black people, being able to confront the political establishment directly, right, in ways that I think a lot of people are afraid to. And I think on this, just to kind of the conversation around Question H and who funded it, like we're standing up to a billionaire who has decided that, David Smith, who's the executive chairman of Sinclair Broadcasting, he also, is one of the owners of the Baltimore Sun now. And we're standing up to him and his company in their attempt to essentially render Baltimore as if black people, something wrong with us, right? And that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges in Baltimore, right? But there's a way that they cover Baltimore in ways that demonize our community. And so he's the one that funded this, the ballot question, funded the work to get the signatures to be able to get on
Some
the ballot.
$400,000, I believe.
That's right, $400,000. There's a brother named Giovanni Patterson, who has an organization called Peace. So that's the conduit through which the resources went to get the signatures, right? Now, Giovanni's also a Republican, right? And so I'm saying all that to say that when we think about, so there are two questions. There's what the actual question would do, right? But then there's also the context. And so part of what I want to do is set that's why I wanted to start with talking about David Smith, Sinclair Broadcasting, the role of the Baltimore Sun and its new ownership, because we have to be clear that David Smith said that when he did term limits a few years ago, that this was a test.
Yes.
Right? As a test to see how he could influence local political terrain. And I think a part of what this question would allow David Smith and his peers to have greater ability to impact the local affairs of Baltimore City. And we should be resistant to that given, what the coverage on Fox 45 and his other conduits are. So that's one part, I think, of the conversation. In terms of the actual substance of it, one comparison to look at is our neighbors in Baltimore County, right? So Baltimore County has 7 council people, only 1 black person, no women on it. And they're actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, Senator Charles Sidnor, who's part of an effort to try to expand their council to 9 members. They originally wanted 4 more to make it 11 members because there wasn't black representation commensurate to the population in Baltimore County, right? So I mentioned that to say that what this question is in the reverse, right? That we currently do have, meaningful black political representation in Baltimore. What this question would do was it would reduce black political representation. You make white candidates for office more viable, right? You make it more expensive for a person to run for a council seat because they're bigger districts, right? So that discourages working class people, right? Black folks to have more access to be able to win a council seat and be representative of the communities in Baltimore City. So, I mean, there really is no substantive rationale for reducing the size of the city council except for David Smith wanting greater influence over our politics.
Well, there are some people who say that when we have a total of 14 plus the city council president, some argue that based on the city's declining population, that is one of their caveats as it relates to why maybe we don't need as many city council persons. How do you feel about that when you know that Baltimore at one time had 1 million people, now we're like 560,000? So do we need 15 city council persons?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that when you think about, for instance, local councils around the country, right? And you look at that, there are certain councils that actually have greater numbers or yeah, greater numbers per capita in terms of representation on their local council, right? I'm saying that to say that in some ways, what we have is actually pretty middle of the road, right? Nationally, when you talk about the size of our local city council commensurate to the population, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would also say is that in a context as I described with white Republican right wing billionaire who has an interest in pushing the question, I think any good faith question as to whether or not the decline in the population is a reason to look at it, that would make sense if we were talking in a different context. But we're talking in a context where there's a
Mm-hmm.
person that clearly wants to pursue power in Baltimore City, and anything that gives that person power, we should reject.
Well, Mr. Smith surely understands the power of the media.
Mm-hmm.
With his ownership of the Sinclair Broadcasting outlet known as Fox News, they've been able to really challenge a lot of things in Baltimore City politics of late. So much, in fact, I believe they partnered with the Baltimore Sun and they started something called the BaltimoreReport.com,
Mm-hmm.
where they called people and interviewed, like they called me and interviewed us on our sitting current city council president.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that report, and on each council district, and it's, I guess maybe last couple of months, and it's up on their site, the BaltimoreReport.com, and they tried to ask the community to give their reflections on their city council persons. And I think one of the issues we're facing, of course, we know the loss of 6 city councilmatic districts would mean the loss of some black folks on them jobs.
That's right.
That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are certain city council persons, and I went through looking at the current list of city council persons and looked at the 4 new people coming in on the council, and I just found it hard to see certain of those non-African Americans losing their seats. It
Mm-hmm.
just seems difficult to think that this bill, this bond question, if passed, would eventually reduce the city council members from 14 to 8, meaning 6 would go. I just found it hard to see District 5 losing their city council person, which is Isaac Sliffler. I couldn't see him losing his seat. I wouldn't think that Ron Dorsey would lose his seat in District 3. I don't think Odette Ramos would lose her seat in District 14. And so some of these particular people who are at risk would have to be people of color.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that I would want your listeners to key in on is because I think one of the things that Sinclair, Fox 45, David Smith are tapping into is people's dissatisfaction, right, with their individual council person. And I think those are fair things for people to raise. The thing that I will want the listeners to be clear about, though, is that getting rid of representation doesn't fix that problem and actually makes it worse. Because if you have more representation, you have more opportunities to get your issue resolved, right? But if you have less council people with bigger districts with the
Mm-hmm.
same staff, because this is also one of the rationales that Mr. Patterson gives in terms of reduction of the city council is saving taxpayer dollars. So I'm assuming then that under this proposal, the notion would be that the council people will retain the same number of staff, which means you have bigger districts with the same number of staff, which means that if it's already hard for you to get to your council person, it's going to be even harder to get to them anyway,
Particularly
right?
if you're not writing campaign contributions.
That's right.
So, folks, this is Lou Fields with the Business Talk Show, October the 8th, and we are in studio with Brother Dayon Lo from the Leaders of Beautiful Struggle, and we're talking about question H on the ballot to reduce the size of the city council. If you want to chime in, 410-481-1010. If you have a city council person who you believe is doing an excellent job and you want to endorse that, you can call in. But if any of you know David Smith or Mr. Patterson, have them call in and view their points because we have a show that's open, pros and cons. Today we're just talking with Brother Love, and he's giving us his policy thoughts on the reduction of the city council. So when we look at big money, $400,000 is a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
for a local initiative.
Right. And if I could say something real quick
Mm-hmm.
about that, because, there are limits when it comes to making campaign contributions.
Yeah.
Legally you can make
Mm-hmm. Yes.
$6,000
And a
contributions
cycle.
per
Mm-hmm.
cycle, right? One of the things that is a challenge, though, is that when it comes to these ballot initiatives, in terms of funding to get things on the ballot, there actually are no limits. So this poses a challenge, right? Because again, David Smith, being a billionaire, can fund as many of these initiatives as he likes, right? Now, what some people may say is they may say we want to get rid of the ballot, the initiative process because he's using it. I say no. I think we have to beat it at the ballot box. I think question H is more than just about the reduction of the size of the city council. And as we've talked about, there are meaningful political, civic problems with the idea of reducing the size of the city council. But in a larger context, I think we have to beat question H in order to send a message that this tactic of
Yes,
using the
yes.
ballot questions as his own personal way of changing Baltimore politics has to stop, right? And so I think that's an important part of thinking about big money and the role of it. We got to beat it.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening even at the presidential level. When you look at commercials, even at the United States Senate level, we find organizations that's supporting one candidate, but they don't publicly say that, but they use their funding to attack another candidate, like they attacking my candidate, Angela also Brooks, on some more foolishness on some tax thing. Of all these years she's been down there and running Prince George's County, all of a sudden, not necessarily her opponent, but the organizations that's backing her opponent, I think it's called Maryland's Future.org, they're putting tons of money in advertising to support their candidate. In this particular situation, could it be possible that Mr. Smith and his backers are seeking a way to weaken the Democratic stronghold on the city council and perhaps run a Republican candidate in the future and
I,
maybe get a seat?
I think it's certainly possible. I think under a structure where they reduce the size of the city council, it's much more viable. I mean, what we know is that David Smith is dissatisfied with the political landscape. Now, so am I, but we come at it from different perspectives. I think with David Smith, the coverage of Sinclair Broadcasting, the commentary on the Baltimore Sun, what we see is he believes, he wouldn't say this explicitly, but again, if you look at the things he's quoted as saying, I think he believes that black people are defective as a people in terms of running our own affairs. And unfortunately, I think too many of our own people have internalized that notion. What I would say is that the system of racism and white supremacy, that is the basis of how civil society is organized, many of the black faces that we have, unfortunately, are not backed by independent black institutions, right? For them to advocate unapologetically for our community. So, for us, we think it's important to have
We're going to
more
bring up
black political
Jason.
representation, right? In order to have more representation so that we can advance some of those changes. What David Smith is looking to do would take us in the opposite direction of that.
Well, we have another member of the family that want to chime in. Dr. Rogers, hold on. We probably get to you in the 11:30 segment, but we're going to bring up Brother Jason, and I think he has a comment or a question. Brother Jason, are you there?